morning to all of you in the West Coast of the United States, and good afternoon to those of you in the East Coast of the United States, and good evening to those of you joining us in Europe and especially in Poland. My name is Rabbi Chaim Dov Belyak. I'm the volunteer executive director for Friends of Jewish Renewal in Poland. We're pleased to be presenting a series of programs about the history and culture of Jewish life in Poland. Of course, these issues that we presented on have contemporary significance as well as historical importance. I'm pleased to introduce my co-chair and the co-chair of this panel, Marek Jozowski, who will bring you greetings from Beit Polska.
Marek Jozowski on this end, speaking to you from Warsaw. Welcome, and we're very satisfied that you've decided to join in this series and this specific panel, which we've have the pleasure of hosting. It is important, of course, to note that this panel is being made possible because there is still Jewry in Poland that wishes to make its history and its voice, contemporary and historical voice, known to many outside. And this series, to some extent, tries to do that, tries to bridge the gap, fill the empty spaces in knowledge, but also in community. So welcome to our session. This session is particularly focused on Holocaust, which naturally looms large if one looks at the history of Polish Jewry. And we are let's say, we have inherited the burden, and we want to not overburden anyone with it, but we are dealing with it at various levels. And one of the important levels that helps everyone understand and deal with the burden of Holocaust is historical research into it. And indeed, we have the honor and pleasure of having consent and readiness to participate. We've secured from one of the leading historians of Polish Holocaust, of Holocaust in Polish lands, Professor Dr. Jan Grabowski.
Thank you.
Who has joined us, who represents a small but incredibly important school of historical research. I would, in my brief final word, before I hand over to Chaim Belyak, Rabbi, to give us a brief bio of our guest, I will only say that we have asked Dr. Grabowski to give us insight, certain background and insight into the historical research and the most recent developments, one would say unexpected and highly worrisome developments that have occurred in Poland, namely the fact that historians, whose, as we know, job is to focus on historical sources, to uncover new sources, to put them together and into a cohesive and logical and revealing new conclusions to questions that they pose for themselves as they look at the sources. Well, these historians of Polish Jewish history, of Holocaust particularly, have been dragged by the current Polish government in power since 2015 into having to defend their position or being directly, be it by proxy, being actually gagged in what they are publishing and what they're saying. I will stop at that because Dr. Grabowski will give us a much more lucid presentation of these issues than I ever can. I am very happy to be participant, a listener to this discussion of the subject, and I expect that all of you will be equally taken by what you hear, and hopefully the conclusions you draw will be sobering, but also encouraging in terms of defense to scholarship, to historical research, and to making effort, at least on our side, to keep government out of this domain of free and independent scholarly work. So handing over to Rabbi Chaim to give us proper introduction, I now move to the interpretation sphere, as I will be interpreting jointly with another important interpreter, Marzena Szymańska-Błotnicka, the presentation into Polish. So looking forward to an incredible meeting. Thank you very much.
So if you have not done so already, you will find at the bottom of the screen a button that says interpretation, and you can listen to the lecture either in Polish or in English, and probably a good idea for you to choose. Turning to Dr. Grabowski, his academic accomplishments are quite impressive, having spanned the academic worlds of the lingua requirements of not only his native Polish, but French and English. Currently, he teaches at the University of Ottawa and has been spending an extended stay in Poland for research purposes, and of course for the defense of his book that was written with 6 other historians that will be coming out in English. This is what historians refer to as a micro-history, and I'm going to leave that to be explained by Dr. Grabowski, that looks at what we call the third wave of the Holocaust. I think it's important for people to understand the context of these things. We've provided you with several essays in English and in Polish on our website, which you can find in chat. This is to provide people with background information, though that is certainly not required to be a part of these seminars. Critical to the thinking that is behind the historical work of Dr. Grabowski is the question of how are we to account for the various specific incidences that happen in the localities throughout Poland. The first book that came to my attention was a 2014 book, The Hunt for Jews, Judenjagd. And what was very clear from that book was that a very important new question had been asked by Grabowski's work, which he has now expanded on with his colleagues to firmly present an important case that challenges the question of what will be another of the questions that Professor Grabowski will look at, and that's the issue of presenting a regime of innocence, a discussion of innocence regarding how the complex nature of being occupied and dealing with the occupation was dealt with, especially in the countryside of Poland. We're very pleased to have Dr. Grabowski. It's a great privilege, and we will invite you to put questions in chat, and at the end of the hour, we'll provide enough time for Dr. Grabowski to answer as many questions as possible. Welcome to our program, Freighted Legacies. Thank you.
Well, Rabbi Beliak, thank you so much for your invitation. Mr. Jerzowski, thank you for your kind words. And I hope I will not be too quick speaker for the interpreters. I will try to do my best to keep my temper at bay. So thank you very much for your kind invitation, introduction, and I assume that most of us, most of you are in Los Angeles or elsewhere in California, but I have to contend with the fact that you can be elsewhere in the world. I'll try not to bore you stiff, and if I do, you can put your comments in chat, so I will try to change my narrative. Now, I was asked to present briefly. I believe I have 20 minutes or so, if I am not mistaken.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll try to use wisely the time allocated to tell you a few words about this very particular place that Jewish history and most of all Jewish-Polish relations play in today's Poland and a bit also beyond its borders. Why is it so important? I'll just tell you that we are now in 2021. We are 80 years or nearly isolated from the events of the Holocaust, 3 generations. And it seems that despite the flow of time, this issue of Polish-Jewish relations at the time of the Holocaust does not gather dust. Quite to the contrary, if you look at the temper of the debates, at the flavor of the debates, at the number of books published, at the policies of the government as well, Polish government, but also Israeli government, mind you, you will see that the issue does not go away. Quite to the contrary, it acquires momentum. It becomes more and more sort of important and relevant, which is very, very surprising. If you look at vast majority of historical events from 80 years past, you will not find anything coming close to it. And if there is something that acquires or increases its importance in public debates with the flow of time, I guess we can talk about this in a question period. However, at least in the Polish history, and of course, Holocaust is an essential part of Polish history, we don't see anything like it elsewhere. So before I start to talk about my own research, which will probably put you to sleep, I will let you know that this idea of re-examining Polish-Jewish relations at this most horrifying time of the Holocaust has been constantly on the public agenda in Poland. And I must tell you that just yesterday I went to a movie. It opened 2 days ago in theaters across Poland. The movie, the film, powerful film called Wedding, has the state refused to add a penny to its creation. It has been done through private means. Now, why? What's going on here? This is basically an attempt to shake people's consciousness. It is a film which goes back to the time of the massacre at Jedwabne, or more specifically Radziłów, to the massacres of Jews at the hands of Poles in the summer of 1941. Now, this film has already generated a huge amount of emotions, comments, and probably it will with each and every day generate even more. The thing is that this is not surprising, given once again the importance of Jewish-Polish relations in Polish history and in Polish official narrative. So what do historians do in the midst of all that? Well, what happens here is for decades and decades, there was a lot of silence under the communist regime, of course. The attitude basically was to gloss over the Holocaust. It was just a small part of the large suffering of the Polish people during the war. I remember very vividly when I was in high school in Poland in 1970s. Well, the word Jew was not even on the agenda. We were being told that the Germans or the Nazis, take your pick, murdered 6 million Polish citizens. It was something quite, for me, quite shocking. Later on, actually, to learn that that there is this phenomenon that we call the Holocaust. Actually, people, myself, coming from a family of my father was a Holocaust survivor after all, but he kept mum, he kept silent, which was not unusual for Jews who remained in Poland especially after 1968. So what you have here is this silence during the period of decades and decades, and the silence about the fate of the Jews of Poland, which is done on several levels. On the official levels, the communists don't want to talk about it because the communists are seen by vast majority of Polish citizens, of ethnic Poles, are seen as a foreign communist agent, which they are, and unfortunately as the lackeys of the Jews. So the communists would loathe at this stage to actually talk more about the Jews as the victims. So there is a very clear policy of the Polish communist state to keep this issue hidden far and beyond the curtains. And the anti-Semitic campaign of 1968 makes it even more visible. Now, the Polish so-called patriots don't want to talk about the uneasy part of the relationship for obvious reasons, because they don't want to see their image of their own society tarnished. And the vast majority of the society wants to be kept in a sort of a dream that our forefathers were always keeping high moral ground, that they were noble people, and that the Polish nation has always, let's say, acted with dignity and with honor in the face of the brutal German occupation. Now, the problem, of course, is that if something is too good to be true, it's not true. And nobody disputes the fact that the Polish society suffered greatly. But unfortunately, even a suffering society can be, let's say, an oppressor or a victimizer toward the most fragile, the more vulnerable members of its own, let's say, nation, if you can, or citizenship, at least the part of this Polish society, namely the Polish Jews. So here we come to the Wende, as the Germans say, the change after '89, when the communism withers away and falls down. Poland opens up to the world, and the Poles find out that actually nobody cares about Polish history, that the only thing that people from the States or from Germany or from France are interested in will be the Holocaust. This is the part of universal evil in European history. And there is a defensive reaction in Poland, and each and every attempt to show that the Polish society, also members of the Polish society, behaved in a horrendous way regarding the Jews, which is true, was met with stone silence and then with furious rejection. Some of you might recall the 1987 very well-known article by Błoński, who wrote that anti-Semitism basically has been a potent force in Polish history, that it has been a potent force in during the occupation. I still remember, after 1987, still under communism, the furious attacks of liberals and not so liberals, of everybody on Błoński. How dare you accuse Polish society of anti-Semitism? And then we move fast forward to Jan Tomasz Gross, my friend, who published a small book called Neighbors, which opened eyes of the many to the fact that actually it's not only anti-Semitism, it is murder. And it's not only murder, it's a community genocide. It's neighbors killing neighbors. So here we venture to this situation where you have a Polish society which is steeped in its own ethos of victimhood. We are the victims of history. Suddenly, this victimized nation, the nation brought up, elevated, in tradition of own victimhood and moral superiority, has to deal with the fact that it's being perceived and seen by foreigners, by foreigners, as a nation of anti-Semites, and on top of it, of people who made their own contribution to the, as the Germans said, the implementation of the final solution of the Jewish question in Europe. Now, the question of the degree of this involvement, you can say minor, very minor, nevertheless, reactions were strong. And what you see since 2000, when Jan Tomasz Gross published Neighbors, is this huge mobilization of forces of denial, of rejection. It's not that people really don't believe it. They don't want to listen about it. There is this very strange poll, which I told my students about, a poll which has been done in 7 months ago, in February this year. And the pollsters asked a representative sample of Polish citizens whether historians who write about Polish complicity in the Holocaust should be facing the courts, should be basically charged in court. Now imagine that 40% of respondents said yes, these historians should be transferred to should be charged. Now 10% were not so sure. I had no idea, they had no firm opinion. Now, the problem here is that the question was very specific. Do you think that historians who write about Polish complicity should be charged in court? And 40% said yes, 10% we don't know. The question was not, should we charge historians guilty of false narrative? Should we charge historians falsifying or lying? No, simply historians writing about complicity of segments of Polish society. So this is the atmosphere in which historians are working today. And there is something we call the New Polish School of Holocaust Research, of which I am a modest member. And this school is basically trying, historians and also sociologists, some ethnographers, cultural anthropologists, are trying to look at these more problematic parts of the Polish Jewish past during the Shoah, things which have been consciously omitted from the official narrative over the last 70-some years. And so here, I can tell you a few words in the remaining 10 or so minutes of my time about this scope of this new research. So first of all, after 1990, and more specifically with a certain delay after 1999-2000, historians gained access to so-called August files, which were trials held shortly after the war against people accused of collaboration with the Nazis. Now, there were tens of thousands of these trials, but this part that I personally and many other historians take active interest in, historians of the Holocaust, are trials against Poles who made their own contribution to the Jewish catastrophe. They could denounce the Jews, they could murder them, they could rob them. And sometimes, only sometimes, they were transferred to courts of justice. Few of them were punished, most of them were not. In any case, this kind of evidence brought together millions of pages of previously unknown documentation, which was able to show historians a new kind of phenomenon, the scope of complicity. And I'm not talking here collaboration. And this is also a problem we can discuss later on, but collaboration means you worked with Germans hand in hand. You are their stooge, you are their lackey, their ally. Now here, what you see is, I call it complicity, people for whom Jewish life represents no value at all, and for whom the disappearance of Polish Jews actually brings closer their ideal of pure Poland, which has been, as they call it in German, entluded. In Polish, you call it odrzydzona, or where the Jews are no more. So in my own case, I wrote a book back in 2011, published in English in 2013, about one county, because my idea was to go to the level of individual experience, trajectories, individual trajectories of Jews who tried to survive on the so-called Aryan side. Because usually if you look at sociological accounts, philosophical accounts, if you look at memoirs, you will see statements, many people did this, few people did that. Well, in my, let's say, capacity as a social historian, I wanted to go a bit further and to say how many exactly people did what? Can we venture guesses? And I thought to myself that going to the level of one county, I chose a little county in southeastern Poland by pure accident, actually. If you look at these numbers, you can see what happened to Jews on this very basic level of individual experience. And my quest was after information. I was going after the information, not what happened to Jews who went to Bełżec. Most of these people went to Bełżec. We knew that they were gassed on arrival, that they were dead before the end of the day. 90% of the Jews of my county finished that way. My question was, what happened to the remaining 10%? People who fled the liquidated ghettos and who run to the Aryan side, and they encountered this very bizarre world they were not really prepared to encounter after 2 years of being, or more, of being isolated in the ghettos, held in the ghettos. They emerged on this Aryan side and they had to negotiate for their own lives. My idea was my question was why they were so unsuccessful. What happened to them? Why out of the hundreds, let's say, of people who fled, only a handful survived, or a few handfuls? And this, of course, in the course of my work, which has been extended then years later, I invited a group of scholars with whom I was working to extend my inquiry from one county to 9 other counties to see exactly how representative these findings were. And we were able, with a group of very devoted, committed scholars, using the same methodology which I used in one county, extending it to 9 more counties, to find out very, I would say, interesting and thought-provoking conclusions. It's not that we know exactly what happened, but we were able to show certain patterns of behavior. For instance, that it was for the Jews who fled the ghettos, the most deadly challenge and threat did not come directly from the Germans. It was the direct and indirect involvement of their Polish co-citizens. Denunciation, outright murder. So we put some numbers on this. These numbers, of course, are hotly contested, but this was just one part. We were not looking actually at the activities of the Poles per se. We were trying to look at the trajectories, at the fates of the Jews who tried to survive. But looking at their trajectories, we could not but observe the reactions of so-called Aryan or Gentile populations. We looked at the infamous Polish Blue Police, which was, instructed, ordered, and formed by the Germans, but in Jewish matters, in Jewish issues, in hunting down the Jews, these Polish pre-war cops displayed extraordinary degree of own agency. And then we looked at the firefighting brigades, which became conspicuous. Voluntary firefighters, Polish voluntary firefighters, becoming involved in most horrifying acts of brutality against the Jews during the liquidation of the ghettos and in the periods following. Some of you might have seen a museum of Poles saving Jews in Markowa. It's a big museum now, sold heavily by the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What you will not see in that museum is the fact that huge parts of the society of that village Markowa was involved in hunting down their own Jewish neighbors and either killing them, raping them, or delivering them to Germans. So in any case, the book appeared there are so many things that we're able to find on this local micro level. It's difficult to, of course, give them all to you. The book, as Rabbi mentioned before, will be published soon by Indiana University Press. It will be, well, not so soon, still 8 months away, but it will be published in the States in a shorter version, 1 volume. Don't worry, it's not like the 2 volumes we published in Polish, it's 1 volume. In any case, you can see a number of these issues, which I'm happy to discuss, but I believe I now run out of my allotted time zone. Perhaps one more thing that we were able to find. We're looking at these counties, looking at these horrifying moments. I asked all the authors of the book, which I was co-writing and co-editing, this Night Without End, the 2-volume thing, which raised such absolute fury on the Polish official side. I asked everybody to pay particular attention to one day. And this one day is called the Day of the Action. Now, those of you who know something of the history of the Holocaust know that action is not an innocent word. It's Aktion in German, and it meant one of the most horrifyingly bloody days in imaginable history. It's a moment when the Germans, with their Ukrainian helpers and also their Polish helpers, which needed to be said, placed the level of horror and terror so high that we found out that up to 30 and sometimes 50% of Jews in smaller ghettos have been slaughtered in situ, in their shtetl, in their ghetto, during this one day of action. And this became a part also of Polish experience. These ghettos were small. Vast majority of these Jews were living without any walls separating them from the Aryan side. There was a fence, there was perhaps a barbed wire. So we looked at who was playing what role, okay? What was the role of so-called Polish bystanders? What was the role of the Germans? What was the role of Latvians, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, you name them? And then once the killings came to an end, you have the scenery of devastation across Poland. You have actually hundreds of small ghettos, which are being liquidated day after day, week after week, month after month. And then what you see, the Germans with their allies or their auxiliaries, after one day, usually they withdraw, they have new ghetto to, so to say, liquidate. And then who is doing the search in the ruins of the abandoned ghetto for the hidden Jewish survivors? Well, you will buy the book, as I hope, and you will learn more. So I guess I will finish here, just, having drawn the initial, let's say, frame, and we can go on from here.
Thank you. This is a tremendous amount of material that you've presented us with. And again, I refer you to the essays and the links that we've provided, which support this and expand on a number of the issues. We now wanted you to describe what has happened with this fury that was what received night without end, and which led to a trial in February of this year, and how that came about, what you understand about that. And of course, we'd like you to spend some time explaining how that went, how the process happened.
Okay, Rabbi, do I have 5 minutes or 7 minutes? How much do you give me?
You have 7 minutes.
Okay, good. So it will be quick. Now, some of you might recall the infamous Polish Holocaust law of January 2018. With the law which actually stipulated 3 years in prison for people who dared to say that Polish nation has in any way, shape, or form been complicit in the Nazi crimes. So, as you know, the law has been decriminalized under a very strong pressure coming from the United States and Israel and the rest of the world. So the Polish nationalists currently in power, a vicious bunch, they actually decriminalized under this pressure. They withdrew the criminalizing provisions, but when Morawiecki, the current prime minister, said that, look, we are not going to put these people in prison, but we have all the tools of civil procedure. So we will bankrupt them, we will make them pay, people who dare to accuse our nation of complicity in Nazi crimes. Now, lo and behold, our book appeared actually in the middle of the whole brouhaha in April, May 2018, right smack in the middle of this story regarding Polish Holocaust law. And soon, 1 year later, in May 2019, we saw the resources of the Polish state mobilized against myself and other authors of our book. My face became plastered all over, the media, in weekly news magazines, right wing and pro-government ones. My face was on the first page of 4 or 5 of them with titles like The Falsifier, The Liar, The Accuser, A Jewish Lackey, and so on. Normal thing. The level of hate was high. And then comes the lawsuit, which accuses actually my co-author and co-editor, Professor Engelking, of having falsified, of having misconstrued and slandered the memory of one Polish village mayor from Eastern Poland. So out of the book of 1,700 pages, we are accused as authors of having erred in the case of half of page. Now, the civil lawsuit has been filed by an elderly woman who allegedly wanted to defend the good memory of her long deceased uncle, this village mayor. However, it became very clear right from the beginning that the organization financing the whole thing, behind the whole thing, was something called the Redoubt of the Defense of Good Name of Polish Nation, a fairly ridiculous sounding name, but now in today's Poland, one has to contend with the fact that even ridiculous sounding names carry certain panache and support of the state. So this organization received major money in order to pursue cases like this, and using this poor elderly woman as its front and proxy, they filed this lawsuit, which took 2 years. And just very briefly to tell you why the case became so important, because the court started to inquire in the ways in which historians should deal with Holocaust-related evidence. And this was absolutely unacceptable. I and my co-author, I was sued actually as co-editor. I learned that simply they wanted to have my hide over their fireplace. But in any case, the thing is that here what you have is the court said that if historians see various kinds of evidence which are contradictory, we historians have no right to arrive at any kind of conclusions. In this case, simply, my co-author in her chapter, she found one part, a testimony of a Holocaust survivor from 1990s, more credible than Polish court records from 1950, where the same Holocaust survivor testified something else, but she said later on she was terrified of Polish witnesses and Polish entourage that simply threatened her life. So at this stage, the court of the first instance, the District Court of Warsaw, in February last year, after long deliberations, after 2 years of dragging us through the whole process, which is, I assure you, not a pleasure for anybody, but the goal was to intimidate scholars. The court said, yes, we have to apologize. No monetary award for the plaintiff, but we have to apologize, which we refused. We filed appeal. And just a few weeks ago, late August, mid-August, the Court of Appeals sided with us, said that the courts cannot decide over the validity and the truthfulness of historical evidence, and so on and so forth. So here we are. It's not the end of the story, because the nationalistic Polish state is coming back. Let's not delude ourselves. It's just a battle which we won, but it's not the end of warfare, because for these people, and these people, I mean nationalists now in power, falsifying and distorting the history of the Holocaust is one of the basic ways in which they consolidate their electorate. So I guess I ran out of my 7 minutes, so that's it.
Very powerful. And I want to say that this issue of the continuing attempt to frighten scholars, to distort the Holocaust and to falsify it are issues that we're concerned about. I'm going to, with your permission, turn to some of the questions that have been raised. Some of them are germane to the topics you've talked about, and some of them are a bit tangential, but I think are illuminating for our audience. One of the first questions is from a good friend, Sam Ponchak.
Oh, yes. Hello, Mr. Ponchak. We have met in Washington, I believe.
Yes. We will, at some point, have a program about his very fine and important work. But he asks the question, were there sermons delivered from Catholic pulpits anywhere in Poland during the Holocaust, or preaching against anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, can you tell us something about that chapter of the church's involvement?
Okay, thank you for the question. Now, the thing is that Polish Catholic Church, by and large, still its archives are closed. So what we know is, of course, outside of the official church archives, which I mentioned are closed. However, in terms of individual priests, we know that there were individuals who were very courageous, people who devoted some time to saving the Jews. However, if you read, and something I did, if you dig your way through a large mass of Jewish testimonies, you can find out that the most dangerous day of the week for Jews in hiding in Poland was, you have guessed it, Sunday. That was when their hosts, when their Gentile hosts were coming from the local church, very often extraordinarily upset about the fact that they are hiding, that they are rescuing Christ killers. And the second part is, what was the most dangerous period of the year in Poland? And there is unanimity in Jewish accounts. It was the time of the Easter, for the same particular reason. So we don't have any accounts. I was trying actually to locate sermons. But of course, if they are filed away in church archives, to which independent scholars have no access. So on the basis of Jewish testimony, you can say that the most dangerous day of the week in hiding was Sunday, and the most dangerous period of the year was the period of Easter, when Christians were thinking about the suffering of our Lord Jesus Christ, murdered cruelly by the Jews. So I'm sorry, this is about the extent of my answer I can give you at this point.
I'm wondering if I can invite my colleague Marek to join us on this channel to also ask some of the questions we received in chat. In the meantime, I'm going to ask another general question relating to the trial, which comes from Jeff I can't see the full name. Have you received any sympathy, support from political opposition to the current government?
Okay, well, I can tell you that no. We have, my authors and myself, we received a tremendous amount of support from professional organizations, from Jewish organizations, from other organizations around the world, and from Poland too. But on the issue, I might be wrong, and here I will have to apologize later on, but I don't recall any official declaration by any official party in opposition, democratic opposition, of support to us, for one simple reason: the opposition in Poland consistently, the last area in which Polish democratic opposition votes consistently with the ruling nationalists is the so-called historical dignity file, or the defense of the good name of the Polish nation. If you look at the most outrageous things, such as, for instance, Polish Holocaust law, what the opposition did, some of them simply abstained. That was it. And then if you have a very recent vote in favor of recognizing, well, the only unit of Polish underground that withdrew with the Nazis to the West in the winter of 44 to 45 as true Polish patriots, it was voted unanimously by the opposition and by the government party. So no, I believe that we have not received any official encouragement, although from individual politicians, yes.
I'd like to turn to my co-host Marek, if he would like to join us and ask one of the questions that is found in chat.
I can't hear you.
He's translating right now. So.
Okay, I think what I'll do is then use the time to ask another of the questions. One of the questions comes from apparently a scholar. What do you see as the future of research in Poland of Holocaust, specifically related to the future of scholars, young scholars who are beginning? How has this trial impacted them?
Well, I guess it's a bit early to say, although I'm not optimistic. I mean, it was quite clear that the choice of attacking most senior historians, such as myself and my colleague Engelking, you could hardly attack people better known in the area of Holocaust studies, okay? Attacking us had a dual purpose. One, of course, was to strike a blow against people who are seen as hostile to the official narrative. And the second was to prove it, especially to young scholars, that look, if we can make these people dance and then pay, then imagine what will happen to you. It is something the lawyers call chilling effect, which of course spills over, and it's too early to say what will be the final impact. But, you know, humanists are fragile human beings. They are dependent on the government handouts, grants, fellowships, whatnot. And believe me, I don't think there will be Polish states anytime soon funding a project about, let's say, Polish complicity in robbing the Jewish property during the 42-45 period. But I have many other topics which probably will not be researched. So I believe that this will be a serious blow. However, I also think that the Polish authorities ultimately will fail here for one simple reason: Holocaust is not theirs to legislate. It doesn't belong to them. This is a part of European and world history, and there are millions of people who have interest in the history of the Holocaust, and they will not allow a bunch of liars and distortionists to get away with it. But they definitely can now use the resources of the Polish state to slow down, to detract, or to threaten scholars, and they do it. That's quite certain.
Thank you. This is a follow-on question in some ways. It's from a rabbinic colleague of mine who has taken groups to Poland. He's questioning, should he continue to bring groups to visit? But he's also asking the question about the impact of Israeli government interventions, 2018, and also the intervention of a controversy that you're, I'm sure, aware of between and among Israeli scholars about how to respond to various things that are happening in Poland. So it may be a little bit inside baseball for some, but I think these are important questions.
Yeah, I mean, the first question is, I would say definitely, I mean, one should not discontinue these trips to Poland. It's essential that young people have direct contact with the places in which this extraordinary suffering occurred. It is important. I wouldn't even go to Auschwitz. I would go to places which are more devoid of buildings, such as Treblinka, where you can think and reflect more. But yes, definitely. On the other hand, you have to be prepared to counter the Polish official narrative, which sometimes will be served to you in a very forceful way. So you have to, it requires simply preparing your students, your pupils for such a visit, so they know how to find how to deal with possible distortions of the history, which will be served to them through guides once they are here in Poland. Now, about the Israeli situation, the Israeli government, I can't say disappointed. I didn't have much in terms of delusions or illusions as far as the policies of Netanyahu government were concerned. But the joint Netanyahu and Morawiecki declaration of June 27, 2018 was a grotesque thing. I mean, you have simply a declaration of two governments or two gentlemen, two prime ministers, who put on equal footing anti-Semitism, the oldest scourge in human history in terms of hates, the oldest one, I would say, with something called anti-Polonism. What is anti-Polonism? Nobody knows. It's a sick creation of Polish nationalists who think that there is a world conspiracy to do Poles harm. So placing with the authority of Israeli government, this an existing phenomenon invented in Poland is called anti-Polonism at one level with anti-Semitism, I found absolutely grotesque. I was very disappointed. And I know that there is a very large discussion within the community of Israeli scholars what to do. Many of them, left-leaning, are sometimes joining hands with Polish nationalists because they want to attack official Israeli narrative. Here is one Dr. Blattman, who is now deeply involved with Polish propaganda-driven, let's say, exercise in Poland while contesting Israeli narratives. It's a very complex issue, but to be honest with you, it's not something that's essentially important from my point of view, what the Israeli historians do. I'm more preoccupied with what Polish historians do and what they don't do. But so this is in terms of my answer.
So this brings me to a question from a board member of ours, David Kadar, teaches emeritus at Arizona State University. He is asking the question about the terminology that's used, which to the American ear, Polish and Jewish, suggests that somehow Jews were not a part of the civic understanding, and that terminology continues to be used in a way that makes it hard for people to appreciate that at least constitutionally, Jews were part of the Polish society. I'm wondering if you could comment and maybe help us understand that better.
Sure. You know, it's a question of terminology. Yes, you are right. It is a problem. For instance, some of my colleagues, including Jan Gross, are now very strongly, advocating in favor of a very awkward term, which is called non-Jewish Poles. On Poles, non-Jewish Poles, Now, the problem, it's not only awkward, it is ahistorical. The thing is that when we are speaking about the Second Polish Republic, when we are speaking about the time of the Holocaust, Jews and Poles were two ethnicities apart. And laws notwithstanding, in 1936, you actually have a Polish prime minister declaring that he is against beating up the Jews, but he is not adverse to the coming boycott of jewelry, Polish jewelry. It is quite clear that during the war and before the war, Polish Jews were a society apart, that the spheres of national, regardless of their passport, which, as you know, in 1938 were being taken away from Polish Jews in many instances, that the sphere of social obligations was different, that the sphere of social solidarity. And when you look at the time of war, it is absolutely obvious that if you hear about words Polish nation, it does not include the Jews. And I am speaking this not only as a historian, but as someone coming from a deeply Polonized Jewish family, okay? Someone whose great-grandfather thought he was already a Pole. Well, he was mistaken. I'm now one of the co-authors of in Yad Vashem's upcoming book, simply History of Holocaust in Poland. And we are having with other co-authors this kind of debate. And believe me, we are going with Poles and Jews, especially during that period, quite certain.
This among so many of the issues you've raised is the mark that we will want to invite you back for many more conversations. This has been,
you know where to find me. I'm very happy to be with you.
I had the privilege of traveling together with Dr. Grabowski to our barbecue one summer, and I learned and had such a profound opportunity, and I'm glad that we've been able to share your knowledge and your perspectives with many more people. I want to say that we intend to invite you back for more conversations. We look forward to the abridged but very serious edition of your book, Night Without End, which is due to come out, I hope, soon. And we want to invite people who have been with us today to support our work. This is largely done on what is called a shoestring, and we are appreciative of the efforts of everyone to support the work. I want to mention one of the things that we will be returning to. We were the co-producers of a movie called Bogdan's Journey, and we'll be returning to that as Bogdan Białek's book about his experience making the movie and leading for many years the effort in the city of Kielce, a topic that we'll be returning to in the future. Finally, our next program is slated for October 31st, and it will herald the translation into Polish of a new introduction to Judaism, written by Rabbi Walter Rothschild, who has been the rabbi with us for many years, visiting in Poland. And there will be a panel of two of the people who used the book, The Honey and the Sting, which will appear shortly in Polish. And they're going to ask the question, is there a need for a Polish translation that introduces Judaism? This panel will, of course, include also Rabbi Alan Isser, a conservative rabbi and support of our work. We look forward to this being a convocation of actually people who are involved not only in studying the history of Judaism, but also people who are involved in various classes studying about Judaism in general. again, I want to express thanks to Dr. Grabowski
Thank you
for
very much.
sharing his knowledge. Greetings. When do you return to this side of the pond?
Oh, I will be soon back home. It's a question of, I don't know exactly when, because our plans are now so difficult, but I am sort of straddling the Atlantic for the time being.
Okay. Many thanks. My regards to Marek Józowski. Our wishes for the speedy recovery of Dominika Zakaszewska, and regards to her spouse, Artur, as well as greetings to our translators. Marek is playing double duty, as well as Marzena Szymanska. We look forward to seeing you on the 31st.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Have a good day.
You too. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.